Hi guys, I'm Eliza Wood, this is my channel, and let's talk about stays. Specifically, I'm referring to those found in the Regency era, also known as when Jane Austen's works were published, and the setting of Bridgerton. Back in those days, stays were used in place of bras. I've been curious to see how they compare to the modern downfalls of bras, like the straps and things like that. Now, I know what y'all are thinking. Stays are corsets and corsets are uncomfortable. That's not true historically. As far as I understand, the reason that most people find corsets to be uncomfortable is one, tight lacing, which was not done for the majority of people back in the day, and two, most corsets these days are actually made just using a everyday pattern. They have one pattern and they make it for all the different sizes, not taking into account the different curves and things that different ladies have. But of course, I'm not an expert on all of that, so I will leave the explanation to the experts and get back to what I'm working on. I've been specifically wanting to try Regency stays because, as far as I can tell, they're the only stays that actually have a short stay. So that would be stays that end just underneath the bust, so you have it on the underbust but no lower, whereas most corsets or stays or things like that actually go over the hips. So I wanted to try to make some short stays, which would be Regency. And most recently I wanted to try making a Christmas Seder, and I thought that the Regency Short Stays would be so cute on her. And what better excuse to try it out? Before I get started, I just wanted to let you know that I did use a drafting method by Cluster Frock, which will be linked down below, as well as some other looking around Google to find some tips and tricks. But for the most part, I'm using the Cluster Frock drafting tutorial to get all of this done. So let's get started. First, I need to take some measurements. Now, my understanding is that if you're going to make a set of stays, you really should take your measurements with a different set of stays on. Of course, I don't currently own any good fitting set of stays, so I'm making do with a sports bra that's a little too small. I don't want these short stays to be too tight on me anyway, because I'd like them to be everyday wear if possible. When measuring the bust, I made sure to hold the tape measured tightly, but not when measuring the underbust. I don't want too much ease down there, but I also don't want any tension right on my ribs. Also, I've got a bit of a stomach, so if I were to make the underbust tight, I would have this weird shelf where my stomach juts out from underneath it, and that is not something I'd like to see. There are also some calculations that the pattern drafting calls for, shown on the left. Now for actually drafting the pattern using these measurements. One of these days I'll figure out an angle where you can actually see what I'm doing, but this pattern is a relatively simple one. There's really only 4 to 5 pattern pieces, and I say 4 to 5 because the strap and back pieces are separate in the drafting tutorial, but you could technically combine them into one full piece. Don't forget to draft the gussets that'll be used to give your bust some room in the front. This particular drafting method only draws a straight edge triangle, but I saw several other people curve the edges of their gussets, and I find that works better for me. I never add seam allowances to my pattern, so I'll add a 1/2 inch seam allowance now, so I can sew a mock-up. Alright, I'm going to try to do this quickly because my battery's almost dead, but I do have my first mock-up on. The bust area is too small. I think what I need to do, suffice it to say that I did not have enough battery to film anymore. But all I was going to say was that I was going to make the gusset a little bit longer and a little bit wider. Once I've done that, it's time to make the fabric. Yep, you heard me right. I'm gonna make the fabric for these stays because I figure it's just made out of scraps of fabric. So I cut enough of my pieces out of cotton to make stays twice over and start layering random scraps of fabric that I found around my house. Once happy with the look of it, I used some brown DMC floss to sew each of the scraps down. And let me tell you, it took everything in me to try making these stitches look messy and uneven. Once all the scraps are in place, I cut them back to the cotton, and voila, my first of many. So I've been working on my Seder corset for a couple days now, the actual corset, not the mock-ups. And I've gotten pretty far and it's looking really good. However, I'm going to a Renaissance fair this weekend, and I know I'm going to a Renaissance fair this weekend. I was just expecting to pull something out of my closet and then I would be done and be happy. But in the course of making the Seder corset, I was looking at the amount of red fabric that I had, and I was like, you know what? That would make a beautiful corset. So I am starting a new corset. Haven't finished my Seder corset. I was holding off. I was like, you know what? It would make a great corset of the size of Regency Short Stays. I have enough for that, and that'll be awesome. But I really gotta stay on track. I gotta work on the Seder corset because I'm really bad at time management. So I was telling myself, I was like, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it. But then I had this idea for the Ren Fair, that an outfit that I think would look beautiful. And I was like, still can't do it, I still can't do it, I still can't do it. And then I looked up what the theme is for this Ren Fair. It's Christmas pirates. And I mean, this would be awesome for Christmas pirates. I need to do this. So I am going to try to do this in the next, it's currently 3:30. I'm supposed to be driving to the state that the Ren Fair is in at 10 tomorrow. So I have less than 24 hours to make this corset. Let's see if we can do it. I will say I'm gonna use the lining that I cut out for the Seder because I know I have more fabric that I can use for the lining of the Seder. So that's already been cut out. I have already cut out the front pieces of the red corset, or the Christmas corset. So I just need to finish cutting out the pieces of the Christmas corset, and then I can sew it together. Another thing is, I almost always have hand sewing in my projects because I don't like visible stitching. This one I'm going to allow for the visible stitching, and I'm going to entirely machine sew it. Hopefully that'll save me some time, because that's really what kills me on time, is all of the hand stitching that I do. So that's the plan. I'm gonna get to work on that immediately. 2:35. I made it in 12 hours and it is done. I have completed the whole thing and I'm not going to try it on until tomorrow. I have no idea if it's going to fit, so hopefully it will. So I'm honestly really glad that I did wind up making the pirate stays because it kind of acted as another mock-up, and I found some issues that would have been a huge problem if I had done them on the final product. The first of which is the boning that I used. I used just zip ties, which are fine if you're gonna do a kind of boned bodice, but apparently they don't work very well for something that's gonna be holding things up. They aren't strong enough, which isn't really surprising, but I had hoped that it would work because it's such a small thing and I wasn't really expecting it to have to hold too much tension. But yeah, they did not at all hold anything up, which would be a huge problem for the satyr stays, because the satyr stays, I don't plan on wearing a shirt under the satyr stays. And I know you historical costumers are gonna be crying right now because you're supposed to wear something underneath your stays. You're never supposed to have them touching your skin. But I know the consequences and I'm willing to suffer through for the sake of this fantasy creature. The main points where I need some more structure or stronger bones is in the center front and the center back. The center back needs to be able to hold its shape because it needs to be a straight line when you're tying it closed, because there's gonna be tension on it. If eventually it starts to buckle, it's gonna make the whole corset or stays look weird in the end. So that one definitely needed some better bones. And then for the center front, you really should use a busk. There's different kinds of busks. Most of them are the metal ones, but unfortunately most of the metal ones are the ones that you can open and close in the front, and I did not want that. Or you can also get a wooden busk. I believe that you can also make wooden busks, but I have no idea how to do that. Unfortunately, I hadn't intended on using a busk when drafting my pattern, so there was no busks that even remotely fit inside of my pattern. So if you want to use a busk, either know that you're going to have to make one, or make sure that you make your pattern big enough to be able to fit pre-made busks. The other option is to use a stronger bone, such as the metal boning, and that is what I wound up doing. I actually wound up replacing all of the boning in the pirate corset after taking these pictures with metal boning, and it did greatly improve the pirate corset. However, it did bring about a new problem, which is that the pirate corset is actually too big around the bust. So there's some gaping at the top now. I think what I should have done for the gussets is just added length and not width. I think that would have made them fit much better. But I've already cut out and started making the fabric for the larger gussets, so there is another workaround that I will be using on the satyr corset. Now I can go back to working on my satyr. All the pieces have been scrapped together and now I just have to sew them on. Luckily, I have a bit of practice sewing on these gussets because they are a pain in the butt. These have a 3/8 inch seam allowance, but you'll notice that near the bottom of the seam allowance gets smaller. That's because you want to get as close to the tip as possible without going over. Once you have, leave your needle inserted and twist your fabric. I've seen people be able to twist the piece entirely around so they can immediately sew up the other side of the gusset, but my pieces always wind up wrinkling around the corner, so I wound up doing a single horizontal stitch with the gusset held completely upside down compared to the bodice piece before finally twisting it to line up with the other side. Once everything was stitched in place, I added some more cross stitching over the seams to stay in theme. I was so good that I even ironed all of my seam allowances. Now to attach the lining I just remade. So I just realized I made a rather crucial mistake. I was attaching my lining to my decorative layer, and I realized on the red corset, the way that I made the boning channels was by connecting the two layers together with a stitch in the ditch method. However, I have already cross-stitched, all of my seams, so if I were to stitch in the ditch, I would also be stitching over the cross stitch, which is not what I want to do. So now I get to figure out how I want to deal with that. I have a few options. I can stitch in the ditch with hand stitching, which I was probably gonna hand stitch anyway in order to make it look more hand done, but I was kind of hoping to do some machine sewing in order to get the strength, because I want it to be like loose stitching for the hand sewing part, because the satyr definitely doesn't know how to sew really all that well. But the stitching needs to be strong to be able to hold the bone in place. So I'm like, I don't really want to hand sew the boning channels. The other options are to create another lining layer that I can attach and have both the lining layers together and they make a boning channels. Or I can make boning channels out of bias tape. Of course, I don't have any more bias tape because I have already used up all of what I had, and I even went and had to buy some so that I could finish off the corset around the edges. But now I'm like, oh, so annoying. So now I get to make decisions. Yay! So what I wound up deciding to do is inserting my bones underneath the seam allowances of the fashion fabric. It's layered enough that I'm not too concerned about the bones wearing through, and there's already a center seam that'll keep them apart. You're really supposed to cap the edges of metal bones so they don't wear through the fabric, but I'm cheap and I don't want to buy those extra things, so I saw from a cosplayer that she uses tape on the edges of her bones to make sure they don't poke through. I'm going to try that, but the verdict's still out. Once the bone is held in place with lots of pins on the top of the lining, I take a zipper foot to get as close to the edges as possible to sew the bones in place. Go slow and be careful though. I don't think I've done a single metal bone project without breaking at least one machine needle. In the areas that don't have seams for me to worry about, I found that lining up the edge of my regular foot to the other side of the boning channel makes for the perfect size boning channel for most of the common bones. One thing that was not mentioned by Cluster Frock, or at least I didn't see it, was cording channels. I noticed that there were several Regency stays that there is cording channels in the corsets or stays. I don't really know what the purpose is, but I had always intended on adding it in. Unfortunately, I couldn't really find any good explanation as to where and why to add the cording channels. So I was just kind of guessing where exactly to put everything and hoping that it did what it should have. Although I'm pretty sure that because I'm adding it so late, it's not going to work out like it should have anyway. I believe that the cording channels are actually supposed to be added before you sew the stays together. That way the cord is actually connected to your seam allowances rather than just adding a cord in the middle of the project. I don't really know though, so I'm just kind of guessing. I wound up just kind of adding a lot of horizontal lines on the underbust, and then also adding a few diagonal lines between the side seam and the bone that goes from the armhole diagonally down to the center front. I did this based on a couple of examples, but again, I really don't know what the purpose is and if I put them in the right place, so we'll see. Unfortunately, adding the cording was made difficult by me already having sewn the pieces together. So I sewed my first line, eyed how much cording I would need, then tucked the cording in place with some pins. Then it's back to the zipper foot to sew the channel as close to the cord as possible. Now I can sew some brown binding around the edges, though my camera is much more interested in my hands. Cut off the excess and hold the binding over itself. I thought about making the edge invisible like I did with the pirate, but I decided that I want that little bit of extra at the top for modesty's sake. It also gives me a place to add a drawstring, as shown in cluster frock, to combat the gaping of the bust that was on my pirate stays. Unfortunately, hand sewing the grommets was not working, so I used metal grommets that wound up being way too big for the space and look horrible. Then my executive producer decided to join me for some more hand sewing while I tacked down the binding edges. And finally, it's time to add the grommets. Just stab it all through, shove in the grommet, and whack it in place. This is my favorite part of making corsets because not only is it the last thing to do, but it's also a great way to whack out all the frustrations of making the corset with violence. Alright, so here is my satyr corset. Originally, I had tied the back using the same string as the front, so you can see there's kind of a rope, or here you go, it's a better one, kind of a hemp rope or whatever it's called. However, it snapped and I can't find the rest of it. I have a whole bunch of it somewhere, and I'm supposed to be wearing this outfit somewhere else. So I went ahead and put some red ribbon into the corset just for today until I can find the rope that actually is supposed to go onto this corset. So, good, bad, and the ugly. It fits very well. I am very happy with the fit of it. I can wear it without a shirt underneath, but again, I'm going somewhere right now, so I need to have modesty in mind. So I can wear this without a shirt underneath, so it will be really good for the satyr once I get to it. I do have some bad news that the satyr is getting delayed quite a lot. It's gonna be a while before I can get back to the satyr. I didn't have all the materials that I thought I did, so it will be a while before I do the rest of the satyr, but at least I have the first part. I'm really happy with the look of the patchwork. I think it fits really well together. The cross stitching, I was going for messy, but I think it's kind of somewhere in between messy and neat. So it's kind of like, and then the cording channels as well as the boning channels, you can't see it on the camera because there's just not a good view of it from here. But the channels have this, you can see the stitching, but I did not have enough time to hand stitch over the stitching to make it look like it was sewn by hand like a satyr would do. So it is machine sewn at those points. Those will be fixed hopefully in the future, but I don't know. Something that I find a little irritating, I always feel like I'm fixing the shoulder straps. I think that might be just because I have slanted shoulders, so I'm always fixing the shoulder straps. They never stay on me like they should. One thing that I find so upsetting, I don't know if you can see it, the golden grommets right here. Oh yeah, you really can't see it. The golden grommets, they don't fit right. I mean, it looks bad. The other thing is you can see that the bust is going up like this, or the neckline is going up like this. I think that I made the bones too large for the front of the corset. I made them to fit the front of the corset, but I think that for me it really should have been down a little bit more to give the top of the corset a bit of room to breathe. So I don't think that I did the bones correct, which is what it is. There's nothing I can do about it now unless I wanted to rip the whole thing apart again, and I really don't want to do that. One other reason that I'm pretty sure the boning channels or the bones are too small is because whenever I sit, like when I'm driving, the bones tend to stab into my stomach. If I'm sitting in such a way that I can have a straight back, I don't have an issue. Sorry, my cat was walking around the camera. I don't have an issue. But if I'm sitting like driving, then I have to slouch forward and it stabs the bones into my stomach. No fun, but it is what it is. But that is the corset. I'm really happy with it. The pirate corset is also really nice. It has to be worn with a shirt. I can't wear it without a shirt because it needs that drawstring at the top like this one has. If I were to make this one in the future, things I would change would definitely be to make the gussets smaller. Probably go back to the original size that I had. Just still have it be longer. And then also I would probably make the boning channel, either make the boning smaller, shorter, or I would get an actual busk. But if you have any questions, comments, concerns about my Regency Short Stays or Seder Stays or whatever, please let me know down below. If you liked the video, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. And if you're curious to see the rest of this outfit, because this is actually my whole Christmas party outfit, I will be posting it hopefully next week if I'm able to edit it in time, so you can go ahead and subscribe to me to be able to see the rest of this dress. Until then, bye!